when it comes to EMFs, we're in the wild, wild west. There's a lot of stuff being said. There is an industry denying that this is ever an issue, that this is even a thing. There's people that are saying, EMFs cause all the problems that you've ever faced in your life. And then there's people trying to sell you quantum chips that solve all your problems. And so I love Nick's approach to this. He looks at what science is there. He looks at what science is suggesting and says, this is what we know. This is what we suspect. And this is probably what we should watch out for. So I just love the measured approach. I think you're going to enjoy this interview.
Well, if it isn't the EMF guy himself, it is good to see you. Good to see you as well. Man, you've been at this so long, you're called the EMF guy, right? Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
it's
talk
been
about
a few years.
something. Yeah, you talk about something and it becomes your study. And suddenly in the industry, you're the EMF guy, right? Like you're EMF Smurf. And you have spent a fair amount of time, more than anyone I know, really digging in on this subject. And it's an interesting subject to say the very least. I'm really excited to explore this with you because to me, there's a lot of magical fairy dust and unicorns that show up in this space, right? And then there's the good, sensible energy hygiene that we should probably all have. And then maybe some stuff that can help, right? Maybe some devices that can help. And I'd love to dig some of that up. But let's start with how you got into this mess. How did you end up making EMF your field of study?
Yeah, it kind of found it found me in a sense. I started really getting interested in what's in our food, what's sprayed on our food, pesticides, glyphosate, and then I got in tap water, how most tap water is tainted with different things, but chlorine, chloramines, PCBs, this, that, and I freaked out, and I was back in 2010. I really realized, my God, safety is we're under the illusion of safety in many situations because I think that anything that is not proven to hurt us is still allowed to be there in small quantities until the science is strong enough to where it's overwhelmingly clear that people are being damaged and then action is taken if industries are not doing everything they can to stop that, right? So that's kind of my background, and I started developing, I guess, this interest in environmental toxins because yes, exercise is important, and meditation and breath work and all of this, but if you're exposed to a lot of toxins, in my mind it makes everything more difficult, especially if some of those toxins are proven to impair your hormones, like for example the BPAs and BPBs and endocrine disruptors. Well, EMFs is the same thing, except I found a topic that was still considered fringe. And when I dove into it deeper, I realized, my God, this is the opposite of fringe because you have hundreds of scientists that have been trying to sound the alarm, but an industry and a pushback that is stronger than I think the pushback that we're seeing on pesticides, and even how Monsanto is kind of fighting tooth and nail against regulation and against GMO labeling. I think that the pushback and lobbying I've seen in EMF is even worse. And that makes it even crazier to me because when I talk about it, a lot of people are still under the impression to this day that, oh, this is some corner of the internet fringe thing, EMFs. And no, we have a lot of science that shows very concerning indications that are strong enough for scientists to say we should, at the minimum, start reducing exposure. But what's happening is the opposite. And this is really why I stuck on the topic is instead of having most of the population agree that, okay, drinking more pesticides in water or on food is a bad idea, instead, we're in a situation where we know EMF is an environmental toxin. We know it impairs fertility. We know it will increase long term cancer risks. We think, or at least there are good indications, it's very, very potentially dangerous to unborn fetuses and pregnancy and the formation of brain. And there are a lot of scientific concerns on many levels. But instead of reducing exposure because of these concerns, we're increasing it through new cell phones and stronger Wi-Fi's and more cell towers. So that's really why it's kind of a frustrating topic where I'm screaming from the rooftop along with thousands and millions of activists. But we're not even at the point where society is turning around and starting to reduce things. So a lot of education needs to be made, and in the meantime, unfortunately, it's up to the average layperson that is interested in prevention and not waiting 40 years for the science to be done. It's up to them to protect themselves and start reducing exposure now. And this is kind of what I've been repeating for 7 years now.
Well, keep doing it. Problem is when you're screaming from rooftops and the broadcast towers are beating you to the punch. It's
Exactly.
also tough. I mean, look, I love my cell phone. This is an inconvenient truth to say the least, right? Is we have a lot of wonderful things. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying being addicted to TikTok or Instagram and falling into the attention economy, but calling someone and saying, "Hey, I'm outside," right? That's pretty cool. Understanding what the weather is just by asking your phone, that's pretty cool. And so it's easy to look away because of all the benefits that have come in and been ushered in with this. But the fact of the matter remains, we are now swimming in an electromagnetic radio wave, microwave soup that is doing something, right? And so I want to talk about the something, because there's one thing to say this thing doesn't exist. I mean, we obviously know it exists. I had a decade ago there was a Verizon engineer who defected and left and was at one of my workshops screaming about how they buried all the health studies, right? I mean, this has been going on for a very long time. I've been hearing about it for a very long time. But the solutions I've always seen have been, oh, put this quantum chip on your phone and all the problems go away. And I have no choice but to call BS on that, because the person who's talking about quantum, didn't take anything beyond high school math, right? Quantum is very serious science, and I don't know what you're talking about, right? And I shouldn't, because I don't have a PhD in math. So there's been a lot of noise. I think there's been a lot of like people selling shovels of the gold rush in this space, right? And so I don't think they're helping you, right? You're saying EMFs are dangerous. You got to avoid them. Then there's people trying to sell devices saying, don't worry about it. You can keep your phone. You can keep all your crap. Just put this device on, your hip. So I want to talk about kind of, what do we know? What do we know EMFs are doing? And what do we suspect EMFs are doing?
But that's it has to be the best question I've received in years, to be quite honest, because that's exactly how I want to position things. There are a lot of uncertainties, and what I'll say first is that the uncertainties about what EMF might be doing and we don't know for sure. This is a more concerning area of science to all scientists. Is what we don't know. It's more concerning than what we know. So what we know is EMF, radio frequency EMF. That's a spectrum that encompasses your cell phone, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell towers. Let's kind of just name those. So we're bathing in soup, but some exposures are closer to the body, right? So cell tower exposure is one thing where you're always in it, and it's a, let's say, an ambient stressor. That's one type of exposure, but an exposure to your face would be quite intense compared to a tower. So what scientists are saying is, well, the indications we have on brain cancer risk is just this one concern alone is pretty damning. And some people say, oh, the research is mixed and this and that. It is. However, it's getting this link between using a cell phone and your risk of developing a brain tumor later in life is increasing with time. There are better and better studies that are available. In 2011, we had the WHO with IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, that said it's a class 2B carcinogen, but we lack the animal data. The animal data appeared in 2018. And since then, you have the same epidemiologists that were participating in this meeting in 2011 that say we have enough data. And that has been true for more than 5 years now. We have enough data to classify this as a class 1 carcinogen. To me, that's very concerning because a class 1 carcinogen is asbestos and smoking. So is radio frequency the new smoking? Well, according to them, the data has already been there for years, but we don't hear that in the media. So that's just the brain cancer risk alone. And some people say, well, they kind of minimize it. They say, well, the brain cancer, it's one in a million kind of thing. Yes, it's rare occurrences of cancer, but when you have a population of 8 billion and you pretty much at one point in the future will have 8 billion people using a phone, if you switch this percentage of brain cancer by a minuscule fraction, you have many, 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 many deaths. And that has to be taken into consideration. When you have an agent and everyone is exposed, the risk of getting it wrong is incredibly high. So, therefore, more safety should be taken. And that's the opposite of what we're doing. So, that's one angle. When you get away from cancer, you have more uncertainty, or you have areas of study that are underfunded. So therefore, we have fewer points of data. For example, if you study Wi-Fi, you have a few hundred studies in the history of mankind on Wi-Fi, even if that's been in technology we've been exposed to for 20 years. So right, so it is completely lacking. If you search Bluetooth on PubMed and health effect, you're gonna barely find anything. So again, the uncertainty is, well, we say we say basically a lot of people are waiting for the data to come, but in the meantime we're using the technology, right? So the science has not been made prior to the introduction, which could have found effects if it were independent, of course, from corporate interest. What we know as far as other health effects that might be possible: fertility issues. We know, for example, you have some of the top, the world's top neuroscientist, Dr. Andrew Huberman, that sooner in at the beginning of 2023 said, I reviewed the human and animal data around cell phone and then fertility risks or reduction in testosterone. He said, according to his read of the science, and he's a guy that's not easily convinced by things. He said, my review of the data is this: a lot of people are afraid of BPA and endocrine disruptors, plastics, but he said the real data of quality is in cell phone in the pocket. Do not keep it there. And yet I don't see anything in the news. I don't see stickers on your phone that say, don't put this in your pocket or put it in airplane mode. Or I don't see manufacturers using the sensor of the phone that is now present, where if it touches your body, it's off, right? It could be simple changes. I don't see any of that. In fact, the industry has been fighting over regulations or the attempt of activists to just have a basic warning not to keep it too close to the body for extended periods of time at the point of sale. And they won over in the US, it's kind of over the First Amendment, and you're kind of making people scared of our devices, even though it's not proven that it harms fertility. So we're stuck in a place where most users have it in the pocket 24/7, and where more and more doctors that are studying fertility and EMFs say, well, it's probably hurting fertility. And in a day and time in 2023 and 2024 and beyond, where a lot of men and women struggle with fertility issues. So is it because of phones, or is it part of all the factors that are disrupting fertility? Well, it's likely the second. So I think that fertility is a huge angle. And if it's not fertility, it's endocrine disruption. Many EMF scientists said lately, I read something in a study that said radio frequency radiation is a classic endocrine disruptor. And I didn't really think about it that way. But when people think about plastics and certain chemicals that disrupt your hormones, it's kind of harder to believe that an invisible force could disrupt your hormone. But it's pretty much the same mechanism. Although it's not absorbed by your body like a molecule, it will create oxidative stress in the cell. And just the cumulative exposure to these forces are making it so that our HPA axis and our different glands have a harder time regulating. The third thing I'll mention is sleep. I haven't found one sleep researcher in the world, and I hope to find this person because I'm going to promote their work. Not one sleep researcher that is specifically looking at EMFs and sleep disruption. Instead, what I found is different brain studies. There have been a few since the beginning of the 2000s that showed that putting a phone next to someone's head for 30 minutes will cause an insomniac response, a sleep onset delay of about an hour. And I think it was around 100 participants. So we need more studies around that, but they already found effects. And it was back in 2008 that I saw an article in Scientific American about that, or I saw an article that was published back in 28. So it's frustrating because 15 years later, this area of science has not evolved. And it's pretty much so disregarded or discarded that the sleep studies are increasingly using EMFs to track sleep. How crazy is that? Well, it means that when you do a sleep study and you use Bluetooth sensors and everything Wi Fi and everything cellular network, you kind of distill down the potential to find effects. So we don't even have sleep studies in a completely EMF free environment versus a clean environment. What we have is doctors that I talk to that are just too busy to really wait on studies to save their patients. They're just, clinical reality. They tell their patients to turn off Wi-Fi at night, to turn off cell phones, and people start reporting better sleep. In large user communities, also biohacking, self quantification, a lot of people have realized that I turn off my phone, I sleep better. And it's I think the mechanisms are already there. We know in those studies that I mentioned that it shifts brainwaves. It will shift you in a state that is non conclusive to those normal sleep stages that you should have. So it is, in that sense, causing electromagnetic interference on that machine of yours. Your brain is supposed to go through stages, and then you have a signal that is just, disrupting it, making it more difficult. The thing is, we don't know to what extent it's doing it. We don't know what will be the safe dose of having a cell phone next to your bedstand. All we know is when we survey the population, you have a large fraction of adults and kids who sleep with their phone. And again, in the context that we have a large fraction of the population that is insomniac or that has self-reported sleep troubles, right? So if everyone was sleeping great, I wouldn't be talking about it as a possible cause, but that's not what's happening. A lot of people are feeling bad, are not recuperating from their night of sleep. So again, the message is EMF radiation proven to disrupt sleep? Well, that's kind of a complicated question. But if it's only decreasing your sleep quality 5%, personally, as someone in interested in being optimized or healthy or thriving and not just surviving, well, I would find that okay, that's kind of bothersome. I don't want 5% less sleep. I want 100% of my sleep. So the message is a message of prevention and a message of minimizing the risks. And that's really where I think some of the messaging is lost online when things are said like, okay, EMF is responsible for every illness under the sun, right? And this kind of absolutism that leads to people that have BS detectors on saying, okay, well, that's kind of an extremist view. And of course, I think that if we look at modern diseases, and some people relate it back to, some people say EMF is causing Alzheimer's, is causing diabetes, cancer, this, that, and they start naming everything, basically. And I say, well, it might have a role in all of this, but of course, guys, I've read the data around environmental toxins. In certain areas, it's clear as day that it is impacting Alzheimer's risks and this and that. So how can you discount? I think that some people are a bit myopic in their view. They're just EMFs, and they're not reading and outside. But I don't come from this background. I come from a kind of wider angle here. So I think that the last thing I'll mention, and then I'll shut up for a second, but synergistic effects between other environmental toxins and EMFs. What we do have indications in animal models and in vitro that in certain situations you have a certain amount of lead and a certain amount of EMFs. And both exposures do not seem to make any difference in rats, for example. They can handle the stress just fine. When you put them together, now you have a disruption to hormones or birth weight in the offspring or something that is measurable. So therefore, we have a big question mark, a kind of Pandora's box about how much more problematic is it making all our global exposures to all of these environmental toxins. In other words, is it the environmental toxins or is it environmental toxins plus the EMLs that are just making everyone weaker or less able to handle these exposures? And that's a question mark. that is quite problematic because we know how problematic all the environmental toxins are in the first place. So that's pretty much the state of the science. There are intricacies here and there, and but big question marks around so many health effects, including to the microbiome, including to other areas. I mean, there are so many angles on this, but I think these areas, brain, hormones, sleep, it's the main stuff that in my mind matters the most. And even if EMS were just impacting sleep, that's enough to have a warning on the label because it's a problem. It's a public health um emergency in my mind.
We look at sleep, it seems that the overwhelming understanding is that, you have central nervous system activation and the system needs to feel safe, right? I'm going to go park my body in some corner and trust that a lion's not going to eat it, right? So you have to feel safe. Um, in having these frequencies bombarding our bodies to a point where there's measurable EEG differences, in and of itself says something. Now, what it says, we could argue till we're blue in the face, but it's saying that there is a reflection in the pond and our bodies are not reacting the same way. And to your point, look, was it the 3 shots of tequila, the 12 beers, the nachos, or the 3 a.m. Del Taco that made you feel like crap this morning? It was just a big night.
Yeah.
Right. And so people,
Exactly.
yes, endotoxemia and gut dysbiosis absolutely will lead to several of these things. Phthalates and bisphenol and the forever chemicals absolutely are contributing to all this. And so looking down a single vector and saying, well, I don't see the data to substantiate that EMFs do, all of this, I feel like is flawed thinking, right? And it is keeping us in this toxic soup, if you will, with the exposure. So the question then becomes, okay, is it just the device that I have? Can I turn this thing off and be safe? Is it the bubble of the Wi-Fi in my house? Is it the 5G networks that are now everywhere, and now people are saying nowhere is safe? Like to what extent do I need to double back and clean up my environment? Because the airwaves are going through my house anyways.
Yeah. So that's a good question. And many people react when they think about EMFs. Let's say they agree that there's danger, or they kind of say, well, if there were dangers, then even then it wouldn't be worth it to do anything about it because we're all exposed, right? So they kind of use this this kind of dismissive approach saying, well, even if I turn off my Wi-Fi, there's my 150 neighbors in Montreal that have a Wi-Fi. And they don't only have a Wi-Fi, they have phones, they have Bluetooth alarm clocks, they have so many things. So how can it matter that I turn off mine? Well, that's misunderstanding just the fact that the signal density or strength will drop off with exponentially as you create distance. So you have certain devices that are closer to your body, and therefore they will deliver more energy to your body. That energy will be absorbed, and it's not as linear as more power equals more bad things that are happening. But generally speaking, if you have exposures very close to your body, you can have more problems, namely the cancer. We don't we don't have the extremely strong data to support the idea that let's say a cell tower will cause cancer clusters. There are some indications of that, but again, the strongest indications is cell phone on head, cancer on head. Cell phone somewhere else, are you kind of more likely to develop cancer of the groin area, testicular, ovarian, prostate cancer? Some researchers think yes, and they say, well, if it causes cancer, if we put it here, what happens if we put it in a pocket? And it's still up in the air, but it's plausible that it does. So I think the most dangerous exposures are those closer to your body. And the good news is, I mean, it's kind of bad news if you have a phone and you still want to use it, but again, you can use it more safely. So you have full control over what you put near your body. You can decide not to put it in your shirt pocket or pants pocket, or you can hit airplane mode before you put it in your pocket, like I do. And If it's not convenient, there are certain cases that can be used that are not perfect protection, but can deflect some of the radiation away, and that's good. There are like a lot of bogus products in that product category in itself, but there are some good products out there that have, let's say, in a specific context, when they're used properly, they can do the trick. So when it comes to close exposures, and a lot of people don't like hearing that, but I personally have many concerns, and most scientists also do that are studying the topic with Bluetooth, because you're kind of replacing something that is supported by data to probably damage you or leave you with greater brain cancer risk, that is your phone. And now you replace it with something with barely any data, but that is emitting a little bit closer to your brain. And every millimeter that you get closer to the brain, the exposure gets quite more intense. So, in my mind, you probably get exposed to twice as much radiation if you put it, inside the ear. But it's kind of speculative, because there there are barely any test reports on what these things are actually emitting. So we're really left with a question mark. Even neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, again, he said, "Well, do I want this very close to my brain, or auditory nerves, or this and that vagus nerve?" I don't know. I don't. But a lot of people are starting to jump on these Bluetooth devices. As we're recording this is after the holidays period. I bet that millions of people started getting on Bluetooth just for the first time, because they kind of have these old deprecated things with wires. No, 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 screw that. I'm gonna have Bluetooth now. And a lot of people wear them for very extended periods of time. So that's another level of intervention, is can you minimize Bluetooth use? I'm not completely against it. Don't want to be extreme in the messaging, but the reality is, if you're in one place in your office and you have Bluetooth on, I don't I don't recommend that, because it's for extended periods of time with a static job that you're doing. You're not moving. So maybe just use those headphones if you have a workout or you do a run and you find it convenient. Even then, I like recommending to minimize it. But I understand that it's tough, and it's increasingly difficult to find the wired versions. So again, a frustration in my line of work is like, well, people are starting, it's becoming increasingly harder to not go with more EMFs. So that's the reality. Let's talk about Wi-Fi for a second. Well, Wi-Fi, most people have it at home. If they don't have one Wi-Fi repeater, they have another Wi-Fi that is a booster in large homes and whatnot. But if it's close to your bedroom or close to your office, you are exposed to more radiation from this Wi-Fi compared to your neighbors, for sure, especially if you're in a home. If you're in an apartment building, it's also mostly true in most situations. So the reality is, turning it off when you don't need it, especially at night, has benefits. How can you quantify these benefits, right? It's all cumulative exposures. So it's only following. I was emailing back and forth with an engineer that said, "Oh, Nick, how can you say that these exposures are dangerous, and you don't have the data?" And I don't. But what scientists are saying is, look, we have all these points of data. What we recommend is following the LR principle, just like in nuclear radiation and exposures to X rays, which is as low as reasonably achievable. If you have an exposure that is needless, for example, Wi Fi is open during the night, but everyone is sleeping anyway. Why are you being exposed to this thing, right? There's no need for it. So, how the technology should be built in reality is, there's no one connected, it goes in sleep, and then the exposure is tremendously lower. That's how it should be built. It's not built that way. It's always on, always maximum level that basically has been set in the router. So for most people, they're just exposed to so many levels of needless exposures. So eliminating them from your home you will have benefits, even if you live in a city. And yes, even if you're exposed to a bunch of towers. A lot of people fear the towers, and I think sometimes there's fear mongering on the internet about the towers. The towers are not good either. It's just more difficult to talk about mitigation. How can you mitigate against a tower? Do you oppose against a tower? What can you do? You cannot do much as far as law goes, at least in North America. So that you cannot really oppose the installation of towers, and it's an entire complicated topic that is not even my personal interest. And there are activists way better placed to talk about these realities of how to oppose towers and things like that. But the reality is, if you live in a city, you are exposed to multiple cell phone towers, and on them you have multiple cellular antennas. So the reality is just how to perceive it is you're in a more stressful environment, and it might be more difficult for you to thrive in this environment. Just like if I tell you, well, if you live in a city, look at the air quality. Especially in the summer in Montreal, we've had some of the worst air quality in the world at one point because of forest fires. You're just in it, right? What do? Do you stop breathing? Do you wear a mask 24/7? Well, people were kind of walking around and saying, well, I cough a bit and I hope that I'll handle the exposure. So it's kind of, you're kind of living in a stressful environment. Certain people have more sensitivity or are more affected than the next person, though. So just like certain people have become hypersensitized to mold or even chemicals, multiple chemical sensitivity. Some people seem to unfortunately develop electro hypersensitivity. So some people argue, is it a sensitivity? Is this just, could we just call it environmental damage? Because sensitivity kind of makes it sound like, oh, others are fine, and then the poor sensitives have the effect. It's not like that. But the reality is, at one point, you might become hypersensitized where you feel sick in a city. And it's so inconvenient, and inconvenient is kind of a very mild way to put it, but some people cannot live in a city anymore. And I talk to a lot of doctors that are in environmental medicine that treat these patients. It's kind of a very dramatic human rights situation where, if you cannot live near cell towers, where do you live? Right? There's not a lot of spaces left. So people are pushed away from civilization and forced to isolate themselves. And these people create groups and are part of the activism. So I think it's part of what makes the messaging more extreme, because for these people, it destroyed their life to become desensitized. And there are ways to go back to a normal response and to more stress resilience. And that's a whole nother topic. And I'm more focused on that angle with different doctors that I interview these days. But it's not everyone that will develop this sensitivity. But regardless of your level of perceived sensitivity, everyone seems affected. So this is really, when it comes to mitigation, again, is just think about close to the body, in your vicinity, and then the towers. There are advanced things you can do to block even your bedroom from the towers and things like that, but that's not what I lead in, because for most people that's not a something that is easy to do, realistic. It is cost prohibitive, and there are so many more things they could do for free, like clicking a button on their phone before hitting the sack, right? So just doing this and making sure that in your bedroom you don't have these active devices. I'm not, I don't have to sell you anything. You don't even have to buy anything from me in order to turn off your phone or Wi-Fi at night, right? So this is what I like about it. It is possible to do it right now, test it, and then in case I'm wrong and there's no health effect, well, you haven't spent a lot of time and money in these mitigation strategies, right? It's kind of small things. But I think that since the science is moving in the direction of proving harm from EMFs, I think that most people that are preventatively lowering their EMF exposure will be happy in the future to kind of say, okay, well, you know, we didn't know much back then, but I'm happy I didn't expose myself more.
Seems like a rational move. We look at functional medicine, we look at loss of tolerance, we look at loss of oral tolerance, we look at loss of gut tolerance, and the system is designed to withstand a lot of blows. Um, After years and years of, say, eating gluten or taking glyphosate into your system, then we start to have a loss of tolerance. We start to see a breakdown of systems. Then we start to see disease and pathology and inflammation and all these things. And in my experience, patients who end up having these sensitivities have just they've lost too many layers of their defense, and they can't take any more punches. And they're back on their heels
Now, for our listeners, I want to emphasize something because I've seen the really bad side of this. I've seen people who are just shell shocked and sucking their thumb in a corner and just can't function anymore. I promise you, you don't want to go there. So it's probably worth having some digital hygiene on the front end to understand that the again, the interventions Nick's talking about, we're not talking about putting ray shielding or Faraday caging your bedroom. He's talking about turning off your damn phone. That seems like an easy one. We have a Unify router that we bought that just has an app, and I just kind of slide, depending on when we argue about what time to stop watching shows, right? And so 9:30, dark, done. It's brainless, and I am sleeping better. Now, here's a chicken and egg issue that you brought up, but I want to just kind of spend a minute on this because I knew it was working because I was tracking my sleep data with my Apple Watch and my Aura Ring, which are both Bluetooth enabled and both EMFs and both. I don't like wearing gadgets on my body at night. It just doesn't feel right. I'm sensitive to energy. I could just, it feels icky, right? Um, but in my experience, the data showed that this guy was sleeping better when the Wi-Fi went off. What is your take on all these gadgets that we're being now told to wear because of the quantified self and all this? The biohacking community really loves its gadgets. And we're just layering more and more on. And they have intrinsically electromagnetic frequencies, Bluetooth radio frequency, right? So I just want to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think the Aura Ring is brilliant in the sense that, on an EMF standpoint, very early in their creation, they decided to give the opportunity for users to put it on airplane mode all the time, except that just for a few minutes in the morning when you put it on the charger. So this ring is not; it's always on airplane mode for me. I use the Aura, so I guess I'm sold or biased towards the company. But I don't see a lot of wearables doing the same, and that's a shame because it's just a design flaw in my mind that we have to connect the ring and the phone every couple seconds or every minute to dump the data. You can just dump it once per day. It depends on how you use it, I guess. If you want to verify your stress in real time, but isn't that a stressful thing to do? Kind of, oh, I'm monitoring my stress every minute. So there's just another angle, I guess, on the problem, is kind of becoming neurotic about it. But a lot of wearables use Bluetooth. And generally speaking, I'm against it because it's extended periods of time. And I'm not too concerned about people having middle finger cancer. But you sleep like this, you have it very close to your body, and uh, I'm, it just makes me overall uneasy, just like with Bluetooth exposure on near the brain. And I think it's a little bit less concerning if you have it on the wrist, but again, we have technologies such as UV blood irradiation or certain, red light that you shine near your veins here. So what does it do if you replace this with a watch and Bluetooth, and you're kind of pulsating Bluetooth in your blood every couple of minutes, where when the cycle goes on? I don't know what it does. Um, it's probably not something that is beneficial to your body. So there's it, and just on a personal standpoint, I see that a lot of people get rashes and kind of irritation from Bluetooth watches, and we don't know if that's sometimes the materials, sometimes it might be just topical thing because of humidity, but there are good indications that EMFs might cause a sort of histaminic reaction. People with mast cell activation syndrome have been talking about it, and the fact that your skin cells seem to react and kind of bring those agents like histamine like closer to where the exposure is, as if you have a sort of allergic reaction that you would get when you're exposed to something topical that is like from a plant, or even when you eat certain foods and people get skin rashes if they are a strongly allergic or intolerant to something. So just for those reasons, I'm not a fan necessarily of using those. Short term, it's okay, and even if you use something that is sleep quantification, maybe you're better off using it a few nights and getting your baseline, and then using it sparingly. But I'm not a fan of just adding so many, I mean, there are entire beds that are smart now. You have sensors on the bed, you have electricity running through your bed. I think as far as I'm concerned, my end goal is, LARA principle, EMF minimization. It's kind of moving in the wrong direction. It could move in the right direction, right? We could have a wired bed with Ethernet and not Bluetooth. It's more tedious. You could have a shielded technologies where the electricity that is running in your bed is by no way transferred to your body, even at, right, we're talking about a few volts. It's not giving you an electric shock. But in building biology, which is, let's say, something that has been developed just for healthy buildings, but they have an EMF component to this discipline. In building biology, they try to minimize body voltage, how much electricity is coursing through your body during the night. We're talking about man-made electricity, because in nature you have 0 volts. So if you have 1 volt, 2 volts, it's under your level of perception. But is it a natural thing to have electricity coursing through your body at night? No. And there are good indications that if you don't have this electricity, you sleep better. And it kind of goes against using beds that are connected in the wall outlet. But there are ways to design these things without the electrical fields. But in let's say, considering that the manufacturers don't even know that EMF is a problem in the first place, it's not likely you'll find such a product. So that's kind of where we're stuck here. So I'm not a big fan of just, transforming your entire bedroom in an EMF sleep lab.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I prefer no tech in the bedroom. It's always my best sleep. It's always has been. Question about these. You like them? I'm old school like this. I will only use this little gadget at the gym once in a while. And I'll tell you, if I'm there long enough, I'm starting to get a weird headache. I don't like it. I don't like the way it makes me feel. But somebody told me that these are basically just piping in the wire into the device that has electricity and piping the electrical current right into your ear and your brain, anyways. Just want to know if that's true, accurate, what you've heard about that.
It's kind of a mixed bag of different internet things, I would say, where some tests have shown that, let's say, if you talk on a phone and you have wired headset, yes, you can have some of the radio frequency that is kind of transferred through the wire. However, the reality is this wire is very small. So the quantity of energy that could go up the ear is quite small. I think that some people that are quite electrosensitive have found that using those could be problematic, but maybe they're also problematic just because they still use a phone and they're electrosensitive. It's like saying, I still live in a moldy home, but I know I'm extremely sensitive to mold. So for some people, they just need to stop. But I still have electrosensitives to these days that tell me, yeah, I still use a phone from time to time. And I cannot blame them, because it's very difficult to do things a different way and kind of forego technology altogether. But I'll say that I think for most people, the wired headsets are tremendously better than Bluetooth. So I don't even go there normally these days. I barely talk about that because it's such a small issue. And what I'll say is, it kind of brings me to a few things that I regret putting in my book in 2017. Like, for example, how much EMF is emitted by your blender, kind of thing, right? Oh, 400 milligauss, which is considered extreme in building biology, and but doesn't matter. It's kind of what I forgot to include in the book is, well, how much time are you spending right next hugging your blender, right? Well, it's a Vitamix. So first, it's too loud and I move away in another room. So in reality, it's meaningless. How much EMF is being emitted by your toaster? I see that online still to this day. So it's kind of silly. I think it falls in fear mongering, or at least very misplaced kind of activism, saying, "Oh, I'll measure everything in my home." No, measure the things where you spend a lot of time, right? So again, going back to the devices you have close to your body, or I could measure what's being emitted by my laptop if I work on it all day, every day. Now you're talking, because we're talking about, 30 to 50 to 80 hours, God forbid, of laptop exposure per week for a lot of people. What's emitted if you're in your living room and you have a bunch of different things around, lying around your feet for extended hours? while you're watching your favorite show. That's something, because there's a lot of hours. It's cumulative. So again, just think, a lot of people are focused on the wrong things and the small exposures, and they don't matter that much except if you've tackled all the rest, right? So just having a clear order of priority is kind of, I think it's the equivalent of freaking out because, oh my God, I ate gluten once at this fast food joint and now I'm damaged for life. Kind of having an all or nothing mentality. Well, it's not that one fast food meal is going to be the difference. If 364 days a year, I eat very pristine foods, like, does it really matter? No. So focusing on what are you exposed? What is a habit for you? And what are you exposed to day in, day out throughout the year?
Hey, we are rapidly coming to the end of this event, and I want to make sure that you take advantage of our 50% discount on the upgrade to the full summit. Really important that you understand we have layered all the tools we think you need to get vitality in your life. Aside from all this excellent information you get to keep, you also get, you like that? You like my thumbs up? You also get all of the bonuses that you will see on this page. It is a no-brainer. If you haven't upgraded already, what are you waiting for? Let's go.
So when I think about vitality, I oftentimes think of almost like a balance sheet. You got your assets and your liabilities. And so the liabilities are, the buzzing, beeping devices, the gadgets, putting Bluetooth into your head. And so we've been talking about cutting the liabilities, right? Like cutting the things that cut you out. But let's go to the asset column real quick. I mean, I get up in the morning, I'm doing Qigong barefoot. I'll go out when it's not snowing and put my feet out on the grass or, on the rocks and just allow my body to earth. So what strategies have you found to be effective for people to help clear and mitigate some of this damage?
Yeah, there's not a lot of studies on this, unfortunately. I'd say it's a lot of anecdotes, a lot of clinical observations from doctors that treat electrosensitives. What seems to be working for electrosensitives is reconnecting to nature. And that's kind of, some people will say, well, that's woo woo. No, no, I'm talking about, for example, earthing, grounding. There's increasingly good science on this, on the fact that if you're connected to the earth, you have electrons going up your body. And it's kind of, it seems that it has a very calming effect. Some researchers have described it as an antioxidant effect, which is kind of beautiful in a way, because you connect to the earth and it kind of brings you back to homeostasis. And anecdotally speaking, you have a lot of electrosensitives that swear by it. They go barefoot on the grass. In natural bodies of water, you have an even stronger effect, like a lake, or even better, in the sea. In a saline environment, it's even more powerful. And then sun exposure and exposure to natural frequencies seem to bring people back to a better homeostasis. There are a lot of reasons. We could get into the biology a little bit, but overall, it helps you, I think, over time, build your resilience back. And yes, it's vitamin D, and it's the healing effect of red light, and the let's say the energizing effect of blue light, and this, and we can kind of micro, silo all of these things, and even just looking at what are we exposed to when it comes to sunshine. And then you can talk about the UV researchers, the infrared researchers, the red light research. And I mean, no one is kind of taking care of all of this. And I think that overall, if you look at what guys in neuroscience are saying these days, the scientists are kind of going back to these practices that are waking up in the morning, going outside, getting sunshine for your circadian rhythm. They're realizing that the practices that have been written in texts dating back thousands of years, oh, well, in fact, the science is kind of getting there now, saying, well, we're disconnected from the natural cycles, and not in a sense, just in the spiritual sense or new agey, but in the physical sense. We are creatures that are connected to this planet and its cycles through light, through magnetism. And I think it makes sense to reconnect with those. So how I see it now is very in a very simplistic manner is we are in a very chaotic environment when it comes to frequencies. If you go to nature, you kind of go back to information that is clean. So it makes you better able to handle this chaos. It kind of retunes you. And I think that, there's no, I haven't seen almost any science on that, but I think there are other reasons outside EMFs, of course, to get your sunshine and to do earthing, grounding. So it's one of the mitigation strategies that I'll mention. And I know you wanted to talk about the quantum things, and I kind of glanced over it, but do you want me to address that now?
Sure. I have a couple questions about. Actually, let's come back to quantum real quick because while you're on this, I want to emphasize delta sleep is below 4 hertz, right? 4 cycles per second. Theta, daydreaming, creativity, 4 to 8 hertz. Alpha, where we kind of pop in the clutch, meditation, 9 to 13 hertz. And then conscious awareness, where we're kind of thinking and functioning at our, kind of work selves, is 14 to 30. That's beta. After that, it's, high beta is in there. And then we go to gamma, which is a whole different deal. But we're talking about, 12, 15 cycles per second. Schumann resonance, 7.23. Candle, about 10 hertz. We're talking about very, very low hertz frequencies that you're alluding to in nature, right? The soup that we evolved in. And then we start talking about 5G, at gigahertz, right? And so these are orders of magnitude higher than any of the frequency patterns we've ever been accustomed to biologically, neurologically, physiologically. And my take on this, again, this is Pedram's opinion, is no one's funding the studies. Surprise, surprise, because the industries have zero incentive to fund these studies. But it just stands to reason that the frequencies we evolved in and the frequencies we are now bathing in are orders of magnitude apart. And you wonder why everyone's flipping agitated, falling apart, and they're losing resilience, right? And so just in and of itself, to me, it's a mitigation. I don't need to wait for 100 new studies to come out because no one's funding them. I would rather soften the blow. And, look, we're on technology right now. Like, it's unavoidable for most people that function in the world, but how to mitigate really becomes much more of my emphasis in my life for my family, just for that reason alone. And now, yes, I would love to talk about the quantum devices because I think there's a lot of stuff out there, right? A lot of stuff people are hawking at people.
Yeah, and people saw me just open the red light. I wanted to make a point before moving on to the quantum stuff. I I personally don't fully agree with the assessment. A lot of people are kind of stuck. Well, in nature we have low hertz, and then, well, that's not exactly accurate because think about it. Visible light starts in the hundreds of gigahertz in frequency, but we talk about it in wavelength, in nanometers, right? So, but that's the same thing. So the visible spectrum starts in the hundreds of gigahertz. But what makes it natural is that it has certain properties. We have, for example, and what makes the unnatural, the man-made frequencies unnatural, is certain properties that are modified. It's like as if our frequencies have been processed, right? Processed foods has certain fats that are oxidized, certain toxins that have been created by the processing. So imagine that the Wi-Fi has a pulsation. So it kind of sounds like a rifle. If you have one of those machines that can measure EMFs, ta, 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 it's 10 hertz. So it's pulsed at 10 hertz. Then you have modulation patterns where it goes high and low and high and low. In nature, none of the natural sources of exposures, even visible light, none of them use these signal characteristics. So I think it's even beyond the frequencies that, yes, are quite unnatural because we use random frequencies that are optimized for connectivity and certainly not for health or for their compatibility with biological systems. On top of that, you have a lot of foreign characteristics that are completely new to biology. And there's a lot of science to support this idea that the more pulsation you use, the more chaotic the modulation patterns are, and the more you add these new characteristics to EMF signals, the more biological effects you find. So it's more than just the frequency. However, it's true that if you go up in frequency and you have a lot of untested frequency, it's nothing good, right? But I think it just makes people, because some people say, again, as a fair argument, they say, well, Nick, I use red light at night or to heal my elbow, and how come I'm exposed to these hundreds of gigahertz and I'm still fine? Well, this red light is emitted in a spectrum that has been studied, and then you also use it for a certain time, right? There's good studies about the amount of light that you want to get if you use it therapeutically. But when it comes to EMFs that are random exposures, we're not exposed in a way that is therapeutic. We're exposed in a way that is unabated 24/7 with machines that have been optimized for connectivity and not therapeutics. So it's a different. I just wanted to make that clear. When it comes to quantum, look, chips, pendants, pyramids, you're going to find a lot of technologies out there. To this day, I haven't found a magic bullet, or else I would have, moved on to another topic and maybe started talking about the thyroid or this and that, and it would be fine. I would be just moving on to another topic. I have not found one magic thing you can install on your phone that makes it safe. Some manufacturers will tell you that it makes them safe. Well, no scientist is endorsing these things. Some doctors have found that some of these things actually have value. So I have to be fair with them. The value is some electrosensitives seem to respond to certain devices you install on your phone or certain devices, but I consider them not EMF protection. I consider them maybe EMF resilience or certain things that are therapeutics for your bioelectrical reality or integrity, if you will. And that's kind of a new product category that sometimes the science is very scarce. And in the midst of finding products in that product category, you'll find a lot of snake oil on Amazon. I mean, I don't want to bash on Amazon necessarily, but if you type EMF protection on Amazon, you'll find claims that are extraordinary. I mean, it's the craziest. You don't even know who the inventor is. They cite studies that are non-existent. There's a lot of fraud. So you'll spend a lot of money in the wrong direction. What I would say is on any topic, if the science has been done in a fashion that is relatively independent from pushing products, like in red light, you'll find Michael Amblin and this guy and that guy. What do they recommend? What do we know is a safe dose? And what, like in therapeutics, you can find what they would recommend. Well, what do EMF scientists recommend? As far do they recommend the pyramids and appendix? None of them recommend any of this stuff. So that's telling you that okay, well, either they don't know or well, the reality is none of it is a panacea. To this day, I'm not endorsing a single of these brands, but I have mentioned in the past and recommended some products for electrosensitives. But even then, in many situations, I don't agree with their marketing. I have a huge problem with how these things are marketed. Sometimes they are marketed and they will tell you you put a chip on your phone, and now I guarantee you, you're going to be fine in the future because your phone is safe. Well, my answer, just as a very down to earth guy, is well, will the liability, if I still get cancer from my phone, regardless of the fact that I had the chip on it, will you pay for, yeah, like, will the liability fall on the manufacturer of this chip or on the cell phone manufacturer? I mean, it's gonna be hell in the future for these companies, I think. So I think it's a very dangerous thing to guarantee safety when I don't think they have that. And I think that people who say that are either ignorant or very good unethical marketers.
Well, there's never been a shortage of unethical marketers in the world that we live in, and
That's true.
and this subject has a lot of fear, right? Because it's everywhere, and it's very easy to panic. It's very easy to want a simple solution. It's a lot more convenient for me to put some quantum pendant
on my cell phone than to remember to put it on airplane mode and not use my Bluetooth headsets and all those things. So, you know, I wish it was easier. I wish it was easier. One last question. We in medicine we have polypharmacy, right? You might have something for your thyroid, something for your blood sugar, something for your heart, and independently these drugs do what they're supposed to do on a single vector. Um, but then you start taking them together and you start to see unintended consequences. You start to see these compounded side effects. And when you'd mentioned the kind of the modulated frequencies and how everyone's kind of messing with their own, custom blends, if you will, in this EMF realm, how much are we seeing this distorted EMF radio frequency soup creating a new thing, right? You're walking into a room with so many emitting devices that the body doesn't know what to do.
Well, it's really, I think, a big question mark. We don't know exactly, and it really begs the question: how can we even study all these exposures and their effects on a population? Some things we can study, like a phone in the pocket, and we can see, is there a group of people with no phone in the pocket, or can we ask 100 participants not to put the phone in the pocket for an extended periods of time? But that's one of the arguments against the idea that our technology is perfectly safe. Is, well, who's testing those in a real world setting where you're exposed to an average of 23 wireless devices per household in North America? Well, no one. That's the thing. Devices are tested in isolation, and even if they have rat studies, there's going to be one emitter in the cage with the rats at a certain frequency and certain power. And so, what happens if you have multiple emitters at different frequencies? I think that overall, what we can, if we think about it in a systems way of thinking, if you add more and more and more frequencies and more noise at different frequencies, and the body is constantly trying to read the environment and stay in homeostasis, survive, right? I think that if you add more and more sources, more and more chaos, we can probably conclude, well, it's probably causing more problems. So that's why there are still benefits. I find it marvelous that people can feel the effect in many situations of turning off their Wi-Fi router, even though you can detect 300 of them on your laptop when you look at the Wi-Fi list. How is that possible? Well, it shows you that it was creating effect, and then bizarrely, we're still, I don't know exactly how that's possible. I guess the Wi-Fi closer to your body has more effect, but it shows you that there's the body is able to tune out probably most other Wi-Fi routers, because people are not dropping dead, and most people are still sleeping in this environment. At least they're getting some sleep, right? So um even researchers who did the brain studies were very surprised that they found effect. They said, my God, a cell phone is not that powerful. And that's kind of the argument a lot of skeptics bring me. A cell phone is it's like 2 watts, not even 2 watts. It's very minute exposures compared to even what I'm getting from sunshine in the morning. It's kind of ridiculous. So how can the body even detect this little exposure? Well, that's probably because it's little, and yet it sounds to the body like a lot of noise. And that's why it makes sense to minimize how much noise there is in your environment, especially at night. And that's really how we need to think about it, I think, holistically, if you will. Just turn off sources. If you cannot turn off sources, can you reduce your time of use? If you cannot reduce your time of use, can you distance yourself from those devices? And then focus on where you're spending a lot of time. Can you clean up these areas? And then in certain situations, don't worry about it, right? Sometimes you go to vacation for a week and you're exposed to this and that. If you're thriving so far, it's not your vacation is going to kill you, right? Even you go to Italy and you gorge on pizza and wine and this and that. Well, that's part of your vacation. But back home, though, in your regular life, in your everyday strategy to stay healthy, then you can think about, okay, well, how do I improve things, right? So it's really um, it really depends on your level of sensitivity and how you feel those exposures are impacting you. But for most people, they should not worry about the things that are occasional and just focus on what's habitual. And that's really, I cannot stress it enough. I think I myself got lost at the beginning in trying to make sense of EMFs. Like, oh my god, my blender, right? It's completely stupid in the end. It's just, what are you exposed to on a constant basis, and try to mitigate that and focus on that, and the rest, tune them out, right? You don't have to think about your neighbor's Wi-Fi. Everyone tells me about it, but you don't have to think about it. Focus on yours, and then we can talk about the next steps.
I really appreciate that perspective. Build your vitality, build your resilience. Take away all the cuts you can, but don't freak out. And set yourself up for positive environment and success. Nick, love the work that you're doing. Big fan of your work. Thank you so much for your contribution here.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.